Welcome to Deep Thought, consciousness in relationships, right? Now, I thought about doing this on my men's channel, but this is deeper, man. This is deeper. And one thing I might start getting into is more the subconscious stuff that goes into relationships. Because really, that's the make or break right there. Because think about it. The average person is only conscious of 5% of what they even do. And the subconscious controls the rest. Or as one of my associates, Shofar, and you should check out his channel, the Faux Show Healing Network, right? He calls it the superconscious because it runs everything. Think about it. That superconscious, without you knowing it, is regulating how you peeing, is regulating your digestion, is keeping your blood flowing, everything. You know, it's keeping your body working. You don't have any conscious thought about how your body is working. You don't say, hey, blood pump, hey, bladder empty. It tells you. So it's the superconscious, right? So, but that superconscious, there's different levels of consciousness out here. And it's really at the base of conflict in society, right? And that'll be a deeper thing I'll get into in another future video, but it's definitely different in relationships. A lot of relationships, like if you have two people and they might have a superficial attraction to each other, and they might get together based on that, and sex might even be good, right? But consciousness, they're on two different levels, right? Consciousness, you have one on a conscious, you'll have one on a consciousness of me, myself, and I, right? Basically just basic. They as long as they get the basics, they okay, right? As long as they can eat, sleep, have sex in peace, they're good to go. That's where their consciousness is. It's kind of like a reptile consciousness, right? And longtime followers or people who know the deeper science I'm about to drop might know what I'm talking about, but I don't want to get focused on that. That's actually a pay on demand thing if I get into the deeper stuff. But I'll just give you some tidbits here. That's a reptile consciousness. All reptiles do. First of all, they don't have family groups, anything like that. They come together for mating and maybe defense. The female comes into the male's area, they mate, and he much prefers she leave. A lot of human beings are on that level. But then you might have one person on that level, but then the next person is a little bit above it. And it's like, well, they're more concerned about society and stuff, and following rules and stuff, and following what the group is doing. So it's not so much about the individual, but it's about the group. Those two will have a hard time in a relationship. Let me say that again. Those two would have a hard time in a relationship because one is focused on self and one is focused on what the group is doing. So the other one wants to conform and the other one just don't care. The individual, they just like, as long as my needs are met. It's that consciousness that allows people to sell drugs to their fellow man. It's that consciousness that somebody could do something to another human being and don't have any real remorse. And it's easy to call it sociopathic, but it's more a case of how a child is. Like most children are very self-centered when they're young. They might develop some altruism as they grow up or as their families condition them to do so or to share anything. But most children when they're young, it's about me, me, me. There's nothing wrong with that when they're children. Only problem is you got a lot of people who grow into adulthood with that attitude. You can't deal with them. Now, you might love the person in a way or lust them or whatever, but if you have two different levels of consciousness, it's boom. Because as you move up in consciousness, right, because there's another level of consciousness beyond like the group thing, and that's where someone can see the whole picture, right? Like I'll give you a taste of what I mean. At the lowest level is the reptile consciousness. They only care about me. The next level is like the insect consciousness. That's the group. That's the hive thinking. You know, the things you like, the things you do are what the group likes to do. That's like ants. Now, if you think about a reptile, they pretty much stay in their area, right? If you think about some ants, you know, their consciousness is wherever the ants can go, right? Say they have an anthill in the backyard, right? Their consciousness is they know what's in the backyard. In fact, there have been some movies out, either I think called Bugs or Ants, something like that. You know, animated. But when you looked at one of the movies, it showed the area where all the action took place, and it was like a very small area from a human perspective, right? And then you move beyond that, it's kind of like a bird consciousness. Like a bird can fly all over the place. So whereas the reptile and the ant might see a little bit of the big picture, right? The bird sees everything. It's seeing all their territory plus more, and it can see miles ahead and stuff. But in humans, that's that person whose consciousness, they see the whole big picture of something. And I'll keep it at those three, because when you get beyond that, it gets a little complicated. And most people are in those first three. Majority of people, right? Majority of people. And I'll just say this, I'll throw this out. The fourth level of consciousness is like when you can feel what another person is feeling, right? That's when you experience like true love and everything, because your consciousness is expansive. You don't hurt that other person because you can understand what they would go through if you hurt them, right? Few people are there. And one thing, and that's why I say this is another conversation, because if you keep part of the thing happening out here is many forces are trying to keep people from reaching that fourth level. But so we'll go back to the third level. Now, if somebody's at that consciousness, they will have a real trouble hanging out with the individual, because the individual just wants basic things. They don't care. They care very little about politics unless the politician appeals to that individualistic state. You know, they seeing the big picture. They're seeing how something that seemingly unrelated can affect what's going on with them. They realize, hey, you know what? I need to be concerned about this because this eventually touches me, because they see the big picture. Now, in a relationship, those type of consciousnesses don't last. Now, at best, they might be able to have sex. You know, if that person at that higher consciousness just decide that, you know what, they got a fat old booty, I'm going to have sex with them, or for whatever reason, or to take advantage. In fact, it's usually those people of higher consciousness that make some of the best con artists when they go dark, and scammers, because they see a little bit better, and they just take advantage of it, or they take advantage of people who are kind of in the hive consciousness or group thinking consciousness, right? And like I said, all this is significant. All this is significant because when you look at any relationship, and I can look at it, any relationship that works, the people are in the same consciousness, good or bad. Like if you got two people at that individual state of consciousness, that lowest state of consciousness, it usually takes, for them to even stay together, it usually takes a lot of force. In fact, most people at that level of consciousness, they're not good for relationships, period, to be honest with you. Usually they stay together if they at that second level of consciousness, because then they can work as a group. And what you'll find is whatever the level, it's always best if they're in the same mindset. Now, it goes beyond even those circuits, right? It goes beyond that. Like a common example is when you have two people. One has, like for money, economics, like making money and living life in abundance consciousness. But yet the other has a poverty consciousness. And that's a big thing. That's why you get some couples, they should be together, they could be together, but in order for them to succeed, they would have to be on the same level, even if it's a poverty consciousness. And you got people like that. You got people, they'll both have a poverty consciousness, but since they both there, they good with life. Because they both there. And they can both relate. Right? But then if you get one who all of a sudden develops an abundance consciousness, is like, hold up, we can do better than this. We can move up. they're going to stick with it. They going to stick with it. All right? Well, not stick with it. I'm thinking something else. Sorry about that. Got lost in thought for a second. Something else came up. If you get somebody like, okay, they got the abundance consciousness, they can't deal with that person with the poverty consciousness. They can't. Unless that person with the poverty consciousness decide to rise up. But then, because of people's level of consciousness, and most people are comfortable wherever they at, they stick right there. Right? They stay. They ain't moving, but they ain't gonna work. And it could be anything. And that's the biggest thing. They need to be on the same frequency. In fact, if they not on the same frequency, it was usually one of two things happen. One, they were on the same level of frequency, but one decided that they wanted to evolve and they left, or let's see, that's the first one. Man, I lost my thought again. This is one of those days, right? It'll come to me in a second, but they decided they wanted to move up, right? Or the relationship was just superficial to the point where they didn't really realize that there was some stuff. Because you got a lot of people, they mate based on surface things, like, oh yeah, we supposed to mate, and they might stay together for that, but it doesn't really work out. But that consciousness thing, like anybody who's dealing with anybody over the long term, like short term, you might be able to deal with somebody, but usually those are just sexual relationships. But long term, the two people need to be at the same general level of consciousness. Or if one is higher, the other person needs to bring it up. Another person needs to bring it up. So it's something to think about. I want everybody to think about the relationships they deal with and just the consciousness there. What type of consciousness? And consciousness is not information. It's just awareness of life. How much of your brain are you actually using? Right? Are you using 4% of your brain or 8%? So anyway, that's it for now. I'll get back with y'all later. Peace and blessings.